Single mother Clara Evans came home after a 16-hour shift in the freezing city of Bangor, just hoping for sleep, warmth and a little peace. But at 2 a.m., a frantic knock shattered the silence. When she opened the door, an old man collapsed into her arms, whispering a single name, Marjorie. She brought him inside and helped him shake off the cold. What Clara didn't know was that the stranger she'd just saved wasn't simply a lost old man, and what he was about to reveal would change both their lives forever. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The wind howled through the streets of Bangor, Maine, like a wounded animal searching for shelter. Clara Evans pressed her forehead against the frosted window of her pickup truck, watching the snowflakes swirl in the beam of her headlights. It was nearly midnight, and she'd been working for 16 hours straight, first repairing faulty wiring at the hospital, then clearing snow from the driveway of an elderly couple on Hammond Street. Her hands ached, her back screamed, but the $340 she'd earned today meant Emma could have new winter boots. The ones she wore now had holes in the soles, and Clara had been stuffing cardboard inside them every morning for the past 2 weeks. Just keep moving, she told herself, one day at a time. The rental house came into view, a modest single-story home with peeling paint and a roof that needed repairs years ago. Clara killed the engine and sat in the silence for a moment, listening to the tick-tick of the cooling motor. Through the living room window she could see the faint glow of the nightlight she'd left on for Emma in the small bedroom they shared. 5 years old. Asleep. Safe, that was all that mattered. Clara grabbed her tool bag and trudged through the ankle-deep snow to the entrance. The lobby smelled like old carpet and someone's burnt dinner. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step a negotiation with her exhausted body. Inside the small house, Emma was curled up on the couch, her dark curls spread across the cushion like a halo. She'd fallen asleep waiting up again, clutching her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppy, a gift from her father before the accident. Her brown skin looked warm in the soft glow of the nightlight. Clara's chest tightened. 3 years, she thought. 3 years since the accident, and I still don't know how to tell her that Daddy isn't coming back. She lifted Emma gently, feeling the weight of her daughter's small body, and carried her to the bedroom. Emma stirred slightly, mumbling something about pancakes, then settled back into sleep. Clara tucked the blanket around her shoulders and kissed her forehead. "Sweet dreams, baby girl," she whispered. Back in the living room, Clara collapsed onto the couch, still wearing her work jacket. She should eat something. She should shower. She should review the bills piled on the kitchen counter, the ones marked past due in angry red letters. Instead, she just sat there staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the windows. How much longer can I keep this up? The question felt like a weight pressing on her chest. The debt from Michael's hospital bills hadn't disappeared after his death. It had only grown, feeding on interest like some invisible monster. Every month she scraped together what she could, but it never seemed to be enough. The apartment was cold. The radiator hissed and clanked but produced little heat. Clara pulled the blanket tighter around herself and closed her eyes. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. The streets grew quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. And then, somewhere in that deep winter silence, Clara drifted into an uneasy sleep. Bang, bang, bang. Clara's eyes snapped open. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The room was dark except for the pale glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains. The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m. Bang, bang. The sound was coming from the front door, urgent, insistent, almost desperate. Clara's heart kicked into overdrive. Her first thought was the landlord, finally making good on his threats to evict her. Her second thought was worse, something had happened to Emma. She jumped to her feet, nearly tripping over her tool bag, and rushed to the bedroom. Emma was still asleep, breathing softly, undisturbed. Bang, bang. "Who the hell?" Clara muttered, grabbing a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. She approached the door slowly, her pulse pounding in her ears. Through the frosted peephole she could make out a dark shape, a person, hunched and swaying slightly. "Who is it?" Clara called out, her voice steadier than she felt. No answer, just another series of knocks, weaker this time. Clara's hand hovered over the deadbolt. Every instinct told her not to open the door. This was Bangor at 2 in the morning. Nothing good happened at 2 in the morning. But then she heard it, a voice trembling and thin. "Please, I'm looking for Marjorie," an old man's voice, confused. Afraid, Clara unlocked the chain and cracked the door open, keeping the flashlight raised. The man standing in the hallway was ancient, at least 70, maybe older. His face was gaunt and pale, his eyes unfocused. He wore an expensive-looking overcoat that was now soaked through with snow, and he clutched a battered leather suitcase in one trembling hand. "Sir, are you okay?" Clara asked, though the answer was obvious. The man looked like he was about to collapse. "Marjorie," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "I need to find Marjorie, she'll know what to do." "There's no one here by that name," Clara said gently. "I think you have the wrong address." The old man's legs buckled, and he pitched forward. Clara dropped the flashlight and caught him before he hit the ground, staggering under his weight. "Whoa, whoa, easy, I've got you." He was heavier than he looked, all dead weight and soaked wool. Clara half dragged, half carried him into the apartment and lowered him onto the couch. His skin was ice cold to the touch, his lips faintly blue. Hypothermia, Clara realized with a jolt of fear. He's been out in the snow for God knows how long. "Emma, stay in your room," Clara called out, though she could already hear the soft pad of little feet on the floor. "Mommy?" Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, clutching Mr. Hoppy. "Who's that?" "Just someone who needs help, sweetie. Can you get me the big blanket from my bed? And fill the kettle with water?" Emma's eyes widened with excitement rather than fear. "Is he Santa Claus?" Despite everything, Clara felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. "No, baby. But maybe you can call him that for now. Go on, hurry." Emma scampered off, and Clara turned her attention back to the old man. She peeled off his wet coat and wrapped him in the throw blanket from the couch. His breathing was shallow, his eyelids fluttering. "Stay with me," Clara murmured, rubbing his hands between hers. "You're safe now, you're going to be okay." Emma returned with the blanket, and Clara draped it over him, tucking it around his shoulders. The kettle whistled in the kitchen, and Clara poured hot water into a mug, holding it to the old man's lips. "Here, drink this." Slowly, he took a small sip, then another, and some color began to return to his face. His eyes focused on Clara, and for a moment, she saw something in them, gratitude, maybe, or recognition. "Marjorie," he whispered again. "I'm not Marjorie," Clara said softly. "My name is Clara, you're in my apartment. You were out in the snow." The old man blinked, confusion clouding his features. He looked around the room, as if seeing it for the first time, the worn furniture, the stack of bills on the counter, the child's drawings taped to the refrigerator. "I don't understand," he said. "Where am I?" "Bangor, Maine," Clara said. "Do you remember your name?" He stared at her for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration, then slowly, he nodded. "Walter," he said. "My name is Walter." By the time the sun rose, Walter Hensley was sitting upright on Clara's couch, wrapped in blankets, sipping weak tea. His color had improved, and he no longer looked like he was on the verge of collapse, but the confusion in his eyes remained. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor in front of him, staring with the unfiltered curiosity only a 5-year-old could manage. "Are you really not Santa?" she asked. Walter managed a faint smile. "I'm afraid not, little one." "Then why do you have a white beard?" "Emma," Clara warned gently, setting a plate of toast on the coffee table. "Let Mr. Walter rest." "It's all right," Walter said. His voice was stronger now, though still shaky. "She reminds me of someone." Clara sat down in the armchair across from him, cradling her own mug of coffee. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with questions. Who was this man? Why had he been wandering through a snowstorm at 2 in the morning? And who the hell was Marjorie? "Mr. Walter," Clara began carefully, "do you remember how you ended up outside my door last night?" Walter's face clouded. I was looking for someone. Marjorie, she'll know what to do." "Who is Marjorie?" Walter trailed off, his gaze distant. "She's important. I need to find her." Clara exchanged a glance with Emma, who shrugged and went back to coloring. "Okay," Clara said slowly. Do you remember where you live? Any family we can call? Walter's hand moved to the battered suitcase, sitting beside the couch. This, he said. This is mine. Clara hesitated, then nodded. May I? Walter gestured weakly, and Clara opened the suitcase. Inside she found a few changes of clothes, expensive, well-tailored, and a leather-bound notebook. Tucked into the front pocket was a photograph. Clara pulled it out and studied it. The photo showed a younger Walter, maybe in his 40s, standing beside a woman with dark hair and a warm smile. They were in front of a building with a sign that read St. Mary's Children's Home. The woman's hand rested lightly on Walter's arm, and both of them were laughing. Is this Marjorie? Clara asked, holding up the photo. Walter's eyes filled with tears. Yes, that's her. That's Marjorie. She's beautiful, Clara said gently. When was this taken? I don't remember. Walter's voice cracked. I can't remember. Clara set the photo aside and continued searching the suitcase. At the bottom she found a set of keys on a silver ring. One of them had a small emblem engraved on it, an ornate letter H, encircled by laurel leaves. Clara's breath caught. She'd seen that logo before, on the side of a building downtown, on invoices and work orders. Hensley Group. The name hit her like a punch to the gut. Hensley Group was one of the largest real estate development firms in New England, a corporate giant, with offices in every major city from Boston to Portland. Clara had done electrical work for them once, fixing the wiring in their Bangor office after a power surge. She looked at Walter with new eyes. Walter, she said slowly. Walter Hensley. He nodded, though the motion seemed uncertain, as if he wasn't entirely sure himself. Clara's mind raced. If this was that Walter Hensley, the founder of the company, then what the hell was he doing on her doorstep in the middle of the night? Do you remember where you came from last night? Clara pressed. Were you at home? At an office? Walter shook his head. I was somewhere cold, dark. I needed to find Marjorie. She'll know the truth. The truth about what? Walter's gaze locked onto Clara's, and for a moment the confusion cleared. His eyes were sharp, desperate. They're watching me, he whispered. They don't want me to remember. A chill ran down Clara's spine. Who's watching you? But Walter had already retreated back into himself, his gaze turning distant again. He picked up the photograph of Marjorie and held it close to his chest, his lips moving in a silent conversation. Clara sat back, her mind spinning. This doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. Emma tugged on Clara's sleeve. Mommy, is Mr. Walter going to stay with us? Clara looked at the old man on her couch, lost, afraid, clutching a photo of a woman who might not even exist anymore. Every rational part of her brain screamed that she should call the police, report a missing person, let someone else deal with this. But then she thought about last night, the desperate knocking, the way Walter had nearly collapsed in her arms, the raw fear in his voice when he said, "They're watching me. What if he's in danger?" Clara glanced at the television mounted on the wall. She hadn't turned it on yet this morning, but something told her she should. She reached for the remote and flicked it on. The morning news was already in progress, and the anchor's voice filled the room. Repeat, prominent businessman Walter Hensley, founder of Hensley Group, was reported missing late last night after failing to return home from a scheduled board meeting. Authorities say Hensley, who has been experiencing health issues in recent months, was last seen leaving the company's headquarters around 9 p.m. His vehicle was later found abandoned near the Penobscot River. Police are asking anyone with information to. Clara's hand went slack, and the remote clattered to the floor. On the screen a photo of Walter Hensley appeared, the same man now sitting on her couch, staring blankly at the television. Emma looked up at Clara with wide eyes. "Mommy, is Mr. Walter on TV?" Clara couldn't speak. Her throat had gone dry. Walter turned his head slowly, looking at Clara with an expression she couldn't quite read, part fear, part relief, part something darker. "Please," he whispered, "don't let them take me back." Clara stood frozen in her living room, the morning news still droning in the background. Her mind raced through a dozen scenarios, none of them good. Missing person, abandoned car, police investigation. She should call 911 right now. That was the responsible thing to do, the right thing to do. But Walter's words echoed in her head. "Don't let them take me back, Mommy." Emma's small voice cut through her paralysis. Why is Mr. Walter on TV? Clara grabbed the remote and shut off the television. She needed to think. She needed space to breathe. Emma, sweetie, can you go play in your room for a bit? Take Mr. Hoppy and maybe draw me a picture. But please, baby, just for a little while. Emma's face fell, but she nodded and shuffled off to her bedroom, clutching her stuffed rabbit. The door clicked shut behind her. Clara turned to Walter, who was still sitting on the couch, his hands trembling around the photograph of Marjorie. Mr. Hensley, Clara said, keeping her voice steady, I need you to be honest with me. Are you in some kind of trouble? Walter looked up at her, and for a moment his eyes were completely lucid, sharp and aware in a way they hadn't been before. Yes, he said simply. What kind of trouble? The kind that gets people killed. Walter's voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight of his words filled the room. Or worse, the kind that makes them disappear. Clara felt her blood run cold. What are you talking about? Walter set the photograph down on the coffee table with shaking hands. I can't remember everything. It's like trying to see through fog. But I know, his voice caught. I know that someone wants me gone. Someone who stands to gain everything if I'm not around. Your son? Clara asked, remembering the news reports she'd half paid attention to over the years. Adrian Hensley. Walter flinched at the name as if she'd struck him. Adrian, yes, my son. The police said you have health issues, memory problems. Is that true? I don't know what's true anymore. Walter pressed his palms against his temples. Some days I remember everything clearly. Other days it's like I'm living in someone else's life. The doctors said it was dementia, but Marjorie, his face brightened suddenly. Marjorie didn't believe them. She said someone was drugging me. Clara sat down heavily in the armchair. Jesus Christ. I found pills, Walter continued, his words coming faster now, as if he was racing against his own fading memory. Pills I didn't recognize, hidden in my vitamin bottle. Marjorie ran tests. She had a friend at a lab. She said they were making me forget, making me compliant. When was this? Walter's face clouded again. I don't know. Time is strange for me. But it was before the fire, before Marjorie disappeared. Clara leaned forward. What fire? The foundation office, St. Mary's Trust. We'd been running it for 15 years, helping children, funding orphanages, supporting families in need. Walter's eyes filled with tears. It burned down. They said it was an electrical fault, but Marjorie knew. She knew it was them. Them who? The board, Adrian. They wanted to shut down the foundation, redirect the funds to development projects. More profit, less charity. Walter's hands clenched into fists. Marjorie fought them. She had documents, proof of misappropriation. And then the fire happened, and she was gone. Clara felt sick. How long ago? 5 years, 3 months and 12 days. The precision of the answer sent chills down Clara's spine. Whatever else was wrong with Walter's memory, he remembered that date perfectly. Did they find her body? Clara asked, quietly. No, Walter shook his head violently. They said she died in the fire, but they never found her. I searched everywhere. I hired investigators, but Adrian shut it all down, said I was having delusions, said I needed to be in a care facility for my own safety. Clara's mind was spinning. This was insane. This was conspiracy theory territory. She should not be getting involved in this. But then she looked at Walter, really looked at him, at the fear in his eyes, at the way his hands shook, at the desperate hope on his face when he talked about Marjorie. What if he's telling the truth? Mr. Hensley, Clara said slowly. If what you're saying is real, if someone really is trying to hurt you, then the safest thing would be to go to the police. They can protect you. Walter laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. The police? Adrian's been donating to their pension fund for a decade. Half the city council is in his pocket. Who do you think they'll believe? The senile old man, who wanders off in snowstorms, or the respectable businessman, who's just trying to take care of his ailing father? Clara had to admit he had a point. She stood up and paced to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. A black sedan was parked across the road, not unusual for this neighborhood, but something about it made her uneasy. Paranoia, she told herself. You're being paranoid. But then again, Paranoia was just pattern recognition when you didn't like what you saw. Clara turned back to Walter. Okay, let's say I believe you. Let's say someone really is after you. What do you want me to do? Walter met her gaze, and she saw something shift in his expression, a kind of desperate gratitude, mixed with shame. Help me find Marjorie, he said. Or find out what happened to her. She knew the truth, she had evidence. If I can find what she hid, I can prove everything. And if she's dead, then I'll finally know. Walter's voice cracked, and maybe I can make things right before I forget again. Clara closed her eyes. This was crazy. She had Emma to think about. She had bills to pay. She had a life that was already hanging by a thread. But she also remembered last night, the desperate knocking at her door, the old man collapsing in her arms, the raw terror in his voice. Some people get lost, not because they forgot the way, but because they need someone to light the path forward. The thought came unbidden, and Clara didn't know where it came from, but it felt true. She opened her eyes, and looked at Walter Hensley, broken, afraid, but still fighting. One day, Clara said finally, I'll help you for one day, we'll try to find some answers about Marjorie, but if things get dangerous, if I think Emma's at risk for even a second, we're done. Understood. Walter nodded, fresh tears streaming down his face. Thank you, I don't deserve. Save it. Clara cut him off, but not unkindly. Let's just focus on figuring out where to start. Walter wiped his eyes, and picked up the photograph again. The places, he said. The places Marjorie and I used to go. Maybe I'll remember something there. Clara grabbed a notepad from the kitchen counter. Okay, tell me what you remember. By mid-morning, Clara had a list of 3 locations scrawled on her notepad. Riverside Cafe, where we had our planning meetings. St. Mary's Children's Home, where the foundation started. The warehouse on Industrial Road, where Marjorie kept the old files. Clara stared at the list, her coffee growing cold in her hand. Emma was in her room, still coloring, blissfully unaware of how her mother's life had just gotten infinitely more complicated. We'll need to be careful, Clara said, looking at Walter. If your son really is looking for you, he'll have people checking your usual haunts. The warehouse, Walter said suddenly. We should start with the warehouse. It was off the books. Marjorie rented it under a different name, a holding company. No one knew about it, except us. Clara nodded slowly. It made sense to start with the location least likely to be monitored. Okay, but we need to make you less visible. Clara gestured at Walter's expensive clothes. You look exactly like your picture on the news. We need to change that. 20 minutes later, Walter Hensley was dressed in Clara's late husband's clothes, a plain flannel shirt, worn jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. The transformation was remarkable. He looked like any other working-class retiree in Maine. Clara bundled Emma into her winter coat and explained they were going on an adventure to help Mr. Walter find something important. Emma's eyes lit up with excitement, and Clara felt a pang of guilt. I'm bringing my daughter on a potentially dangerous investigation, she thought. Mother of the Year material right here. But what choice did she have? She couldn't leave Emma alone, and she couldn't ask anyone to watch her without raising questions. They climbed into Clara's pickup truck, Walter in the passenger seat and Emma strapped into her booster in the back. As Clara started the engine, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The black sedan was still parked across the street. Don't be paranoid, she told herself again. But she made a mental note of the license plate anyway. The drive to Industrial Road took them through the older part of Bangor, past abandoned factories and boarded-up storefronts, the casualties of economic downturns and shifting industries. The warehouse district was a graveyard of rust and broken windows. There, Walter said, pointing to a low brick building at the end of a dead-end street. That's it. Clara pulled up to the building and killed the engine. The warehouse looked like it had been abandoned for years. Graffiti covered the walls and several windows were smashed. But when Clara looked closer, she noticed the padlock on the front door looked relatively new. Someone's been here, she said. Walter was already out of the truck, moving toward the door with surprising energy. Clara helped Emma down and followed, her hand instinctively moving to the heavy flashlight in her jacket pocket. The padlock was thick and industrial, but Clara had spent years working with locks and electrical panels. She pulled a small toolkit from her pocket. She always carried one and had the lock open in under 2 minutes. Where'd you learn to do that? Walter asked, impressed. YouTube, Clara said dryly. And desperation, the door swung open with a rusty groan revealing darkness beyond. Clara flicked on her flashlight and stepped inside, Emma clinging to her leg. The warehouse was cavernous and smelled of mildew and old paper. Dust motes danced in the beam of Clara's flashlight as she swept it across the space. Most of the building was empty, but at the far end she could see stacks of boxes and filing cabinets. Stay close, Clara whispered to Emma. They made their way across the concrete floor, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. As they approached the storage area, Walter let out a small gasp. This is it, he breathed. This is where Marjorie kept everything. But something was wrong. The filing cabinets had been pried open, their drawers pulled out and emptied. Papers were scattered across the floor, many of them torn or water-damaged. Boxes had been ripped apart, their contents strewn about like the aftermath of a tornado. Someone's already been here, Clara said, her heart sinking. Walter moved through the wreckage like a man in a trance, picking up papers and discarding them, searching for something specific. His breathing became more labored, more desperate. No, 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 he muttered. It has to be here. She said it would be here. Clara knelt down and started sifting through the papers. Most of them were old financial statements, donation records, meeting minutes, the bureaucratic detritus of a charitable foundation. Emma crouched beside her mother, picking up a page covered in numbers. Mommy, what are these? Just old paperwork, baby. Help me look for anything that seems important. They searched for nearly an hour, but found nothing useful. Whoever had ransacked the warehouse had been thorough. Walter sank down onto an overturned crate, his face in his hands. It's gone. It's all gone. Clara felt a wave of sympathy for the old man. He'd been so certain this place held answers, and now, wait. Clara's eyes landed on something in the corner. A ventilation grate set into the wall, partially hidden behind a fallen shelving unit. The screws holding it in place looked loose, as if someone had removed and replaced them recently. Mr. Walter, Clara said quietly. Did Marjorie ever talk about hiding places, secret spots? Walter looked up, confused. She always said the best hiding place was the one no one thinks to look. Clara approached the grate and pulled out her screwdriver. The screws came out easily, too easily. Someone had definitely been here recently. She pulled the grate away, revealing a dark cavity behind it. Clara shone her flashlight inside and saw something that made her pulse quicken. A metal lockbox. Emma stepped back a bit. Okay. Clara reached into the cavity and pulled out the box. It was heavy, secured with a combination lock. She set it on the ground and looked at Walter. Any idea what the combination might be? Walter stared at the box as if he'd seen a ghost. His lips moved silently, working through some internal calculation. Then he leaned forward and spun the dial. 3, 17, 85. The lock clicked open. Clara held her breath as Walter lifted the lid. Inside were documents, contracts, bank statements, emails printed on paper. But more importantly, there were photographs. Dozens of them. Walter pulled out the first one and his hands began to shake. It showed Adrian Hensley standing outside a construction site, shaking hands with a man Clara recognized from news reports, a known organized crime figure who'd been under federal investigation for money laundering. The next photo showed the same man handing Adrian an envelope. The next showed Adrian entering a private account office in the Cayman Islands. Dear God, Walter whispered. She documented everything. Clara picked up one of the contracts. It was a land purchase agreement for a property in Portland, dated 6 years ago. But something was off about the signature at the bottom, Walter's signature. Did you sign this? Clara asked, showing him the document. Walter studied it, his brow furrowed. That's not, the letters are wrong, see here. He pointed to the way the W curved. I always loop it twice. This is only once. A forgery. Clara said. Walter nodded slowly, his face pale. Adrian forged my signature. He's been doing it for years, using my name to authorize deals I knew nothing about. Clara flipped through more documents. Each one revealed another piece of the puzzle: shell companies, fraudulent contracts, embezzled funds from the St. Mary's Trust. Millions of dollars, all redirected into private accounts controlled by Adrian Hensley. And at the bottom of the box, wrapped in plastic, was a USB drive with a label in neat handwriting: backup. M.W. Marjorie. Walter said, touching the label gently. She always thought of everything. Clara pocketed the USB drive and started gathering the most damning documents. We need to get out of here. If someone's been looking for this, they might come back. But even as she said it, she heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of a car engine outside. Footsteps approaching the warehouse door. Clara grabbed Emma and pulled her behind a stack of crates. Walter followed, clutching the lockbox to his chest. The warehouse door opened, and light spilled across the floor. I'm telling you, it's not here, a man's voice said. Young, impatient. We've torn this place apart 3 times. Then we keep looking. Another voice, older and harder. Mr. Hensley was very clear. Find the old man, find the documents, and make sure neither of them causes problems. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She pressed her hand over Emma's mouth gently, praying her daughter would stay quiet. What about the woman? The younger voice asked. What woman? The news is saying someone matching the old man's description was seen in the East Side neighborhood last night. We've got people checking apartment buildings. Clara felt her stomach drop. They were looking for her. They knew. The footsteps moved closer, sweeping through the warehouse systematically. Clara could see the beams of their flashlights cutting through the darkness. She looked at Walter, who met her gaze with an expression of profound guilt and fear. I'm sorry, he mouthed. Clara shook her head slightly. Not your fault. The footsteps were getting closer. Clara scanned the warehouse desperately, looking for another exit. There, a back door, partially hidden behind more debris. If they could reach it without being seen. She pointed, and Walter nodded understanding. As quietly as possible, Clara began leading Emma toward the back door, staying low, moving from cover to cover. Walter followed, the lockbox tucked under his arm. They were almost there when Emma's foot caught on a piece of loose metal. It clattered across the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the cavernous space. The flashlight beam swung toward them immediately. There, Clara didn't think. She grabbed Emma, hoisted her onto her hip and ran. Clara burst through the back door of the warehouse with Emma clutched against her chest. Walter stumbling behind her. The cold air hit her like a slap, but she didn't stop moving. Get to the truck, she shouted. Behind them, she could hear shouts and the thunder of footsteps. The men were giving chase. Clara's pickup was parked around the side of the building, a 30-yard sprint that felt like a mile. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she pushed harder. She reached the truck and yanked the back door open, practically throwing Emma into her booster seat. Her fingers fumbled with the buckle, once, twice. Clara, Walter yelled. She looked up. The 2 men had rounded the corner of the warehouse. One of them was young and athletic, closing the distance fast. The other was older but carried himself like someone who'd done this kind of work before. Clara slammed the back door shut and dove into the driver's seat. Her hands shook as she jammed the key into the ignition. Come on. Come on. Come on. The engine roared to life. Walter threw himself into the passenger seat, and Clara slammed her foot on the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the snow-slicked pavement. In the rearview mirror, Clara saw the younger man reach the spot where they'd been parked just seconds before. He raised something, a phone, and started taking pictures. He got my license plate. The realization sent ice through Clara's veins, but she forced herself to focus on the road ahead. She took a hard left onto the main street, nearly fishtailing on a patch of ice. Mommy, you're driving scary, Emma said from the back seat, her voice high and frightened. I know, baby. I'm sorry, just hold on tight, okay? Clara's mind raced as she navigated through the streets. They couldn't go home. Not if those men had her license plate. They could trace it, find her address. Emma's address. Where do we go? Walter asked, his voice shaking. Clara didn't answer immediately. She was too busy checking the rearview mirror, making sure they weren't being followed. After several turns and doubling back, she was reasonably confident they'd lost them. But lost them for how long? Mr. Walter, Clara said, her voice tight. Think. Is there anywhere else Marjorie mentioned? Anywhere those men wouldn't know about? Walter pressed his hands against his temples, his face contorted with concentration. Marjorie said something once. About if something happened to her. What did she say? A house, Walter said slowly, the memory surfacing like something from deep water. She said if she ever disappeared, I should look for her at the house on Maple Street. Maple Street where? Bangor has 3 different Maple Streets. Walter's eyes suddenly focused, sharp and clear. The old one, north of the river. The house with the red door and the oak tree in the front yard. She said it was her safe place. The place no one else knew about. Clara knew the neighborhood he was talking about, an older residential area that had seen better days. A lot of the houses there were abandoned or in foreclosure. It was also on the opposite side of town from her apartment, which meant if those men were heading to her address, it would buy them time. Okay, Clara said, making a decision. We go to Maple Street. We hide. And we figure out what the hell to do with what we found. The drive took 20 minutes, and every one of them felt like an hour. Clara kept checking the mirror, kept watching for black sedans or anyone paying too much attention to them. Emma had gone quiet in the back seat, sensing her mother's fear. Clara hated that her daughter had to be afraid, had to be part of this insanity. What have I gotten us into? But it was too late for second-guessing now. Maple Street appeared ahead, a narrow road lined with old Victorian houses in various states of decay. Most of the properties looked empty, their windows dark, their yards overgrown. There, Walter said, pointing to a house halfway down the block. It was a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. But the door was indeed red, faded and weathered, but unmistakably red. And in the front yard stood a massive oak tree, its bare branches reaching toward the gray sky like grasping fingers. Clara pulled into the driveway, which was hidden from the street by overgrown hedges. She killed the engine and sat for a moment, her hands still gripping the steering wheel. Mommy? Emma's voice was small. I'm scared. Clara turned around and reached back to take her daughter's hand. I know, baby. Me too, but we're going to be okay. I promise. It was a promise she had no right to make, but she made it anyway. They got out of the truck and approached the house cautiously. The front door was locked, but one of the first-floor windows had been broken, probably by vandals or squatters. Clara helped Emma through first, then climbed in herself, with Walter following. The interior of the house was dark and smelled of must and old smoke. Clara pulled out her flashlight and swept the beam across the room. They were standing in what had once been a living room. Furniture sat covered in dust sheets like sleeping ghosts. On the walls she could see the faint outlines where picture frames had once hung. Marjorie bought this place years ago, Walter said quietly, his voice echoing in the empty space. Before we started the foundation, she said she wanted a place that was just hers. Somewhere she could think. Clara moved deeper into the house, checking each room. The kitchen was empty, except for an old table and 2 chairs. The bathroom had no water. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms, all stripped bare except for one. In the smallest bedroom at the end of the hall, Clara found something that made her stop. A desk sat against the wall, and on it were papers, lots of them. Files and folders, all neatly organized. And tacked to the wall above the desk was a massive corkboard, covered in photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes, all connected by strings of red yarn. It looked like the work of someone obsessed, or someone desperately trying to document the truth. Walter, Clara called down the stairs. You need to see this. Walter climbed the stairs slowly, Emma holding his hand. When he reached the doorway of the bedroom, he stopped, his face going pale. This was Marjorie's, he whispered. This was her thinking space. Clara approached the corkboard, studying it in the beam of her flashlight. The center of the web of connections was a photograph of Adrian Hensley. Around him, connected by red lines, were photos of various businessmen, politicians, and city officials. Each one had notes written beneath it. Accepted $50K donation. Voted to approve zoning change. Appointed to oversight committee after contribution. She was mapping out the corruption. Clara said. Everyone Adrian bribed or influenced. Walter stepped closer, his eyes scanning the board. I never knew she'd gotten this far. She must have been working on this for years. Clara's flashlight landed on a date written in the corner of one of the documents, June 3, 2020. The day before the fire. She was close, Clara said, close to having everything she needed to expose him. And that's why he killed her. Walter said, his voice breaking. That's why he set the fire. Clara turned to look at him. Tears were streaming down the old man's face, but his expression was one of clarity. The fog of his confusion had lifted, at least for the moment. I knew, Walter said, part of me always knew. But I told myself it was the dementia. The confusion. I told myself I was imagining things because I was sick. He looked at Clara. But I wasn't sick. Adrian was drugging me, keeping me confused so I couldn't fight back, couldn't ask questions. Why didn't he just? Clara stopped, unable to finish the sentence in front of Emma. But Walter understood. Kill me. He tried. Subtle things, overdoses of medication that looked like accidents, mixing drugs that shouldn't be mixed. But I'm stubborn. I kept surviving. So he settled for keeping me controlled. A confused old man is harmless. A dead father is a scandal. Clara felt sick. This was so much worse than she'd imagined. She turned back to the corkboard, looking for something, anything that might help them. Her eyes landed on a manila envelope pinned to the corner, labeled in Marjorie's handwriting, "Insurance." Clara unpinned it and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, dated June 2, 2020. To whoever finds this, my name is Marjorie Walsh, and if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me. I've spent 3 years documenting the criminal activities of Adrian Hensley and his associates. The evidence is overwhelming. Fraud, bribery, money laundering, and more. I've made copies of everything and hidden them in multiple locations. One set is in this house. Another is in a safety deposit box at First National Bank, under the name Sarah Mitchell, account number 7734982. A third set has been sent to a trusted contact, who will release it to the press if I disappear. Walter Hensley is a good man who's been systematically poisoned and manipulated by his own son. If he's reading this, Walter, I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything. I was trying to protect you. Trust Clara Evans if she helps you. She's honest and brave, even if she doesn't believe it herself. The truth must come out. Too many people have been hurt. Too many children have lost the support they needed because Adrian diverted foundation funds for personal gain. Don't let him win. M.W. Clara's hands were shaking as she finished reading. She looked at the date again. She wrote this the day before the fire, Clara said. She knew something was coming. And she knew your name. Walter said, looking at Clara with wonder. How did she know your name? Clara had no answer. It seemed impossible. She'd never met Marjorie Walsh, had barely been aware of the St. Mary's Trust beyond doing that one electrical job. Unless, the electrical work, Clara said suddenly. I did work at the foundation office about a week before the fire. There was a problem with the wiring in the archive room. Marjorie was there, she supervised the whole thing, made sure I didn't disturb any of the files. She must have vetted you somehow. Walter said, looked into your background. She was thorough like that. Clara thought back to that day. She remembered Marjorie as kind but intense, the kind of person who asked a lot of questions. She'd asked Clara about her family, her husband's death, her struggles with debt. At the time, Clara had thought she was just being friendly. Now she realized Marjorie had been evaluating her. And apparently Clara had passed some kind of test. First National Bank, Clara said, looking at Walter. Do you have any identification? Anything that could get us into that safety deposit box? Walter patted his pockets, then remembered. My wallet. It's in the suitcase back at your apartment. Which we can't go to, Clara said. Damn. They stood in silence for a moment, trying to figure out their next move. Then Emma, who had been sitting quietly on the floor, spoke up. Mommy, there's a basement. Clara looked at her daughter. What? Emma pointed to the floor. I saw a door, under the rug in the kitchen. It goes down. Clara and Walter exchanged glances. They hurried back downstairs to the kitchen. And sure enough, when Clara pulled back the rotting rug, there was a trapdoor set into the floor. Clara pulled it open, revealing a set of wooden stairs descending into darkness. The smell that wafted up was old and musty, but there was something else too, something chemical, like burnt plastic or rubber. Stay here with Emma, Clara told Walter, and before he could protest, she descended into the basement. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a space that was surprisingly intact. Unlike the rest of the house, the basement showed signs of recent use. There was a camping lantern on a shelf, a sleeping bag rolled up in the corner, and Clara's breath caught, filing cabinets. 3 of them lined up against the far wall. She approached them slowly, almost afraid of what she might find. The first cabinet was filled with financial records, duplicates of what they'd found at the warehouse, but in better condition. The second contained photographs and surveillance logs. But the third cabinet, the third one, made Clara's pulse quicken. It was full of newspaper clippings and missing persons reports. Dozens of them, all from around the time of the fire. And at the front of the drawer was a file labeled Marjorie Walsh, alive. Clara pulled it out with trembling hands and opened it. Inside were photographs, recent ones, judging by the clothing and cars in the background. They showed a woman with dark hair, older than in the photo Walter carried, but unmistakably the same person. She was alive. Marjorie Walsh was alive. Clara stared at the photographs, her mind reeling. The images showed her at different locations, a grocery store, a library, walking down a street. Clara didn't recognize. In each photo, Marjorie looked over her shoulder, cautious, aware, like someone who knew she was being hunted. The most recent photo was dated 3 months ago. Clara's hands shook as she flipped through the file. There were notes too, written in Marjorie's own handwriting. Can't risk contact with W. They're watching him too closely. Moved to safe house #3. Previous location compromised. Evidence ready to release, waiting for right moment. Trust no one except CE if W finds her. CE Clara Evans. A woman she'd never met had placed her faith in Clara based on one brief encounter 5 years ago. The weight of that trust felt crushing. Clara, Walter called down from above. What did you find? Clara climbed back up the stairs, the file clutched to her chest. When she emerged into the kitchen, she found Walter comforting Emma, who was crying quietly. It's okay, sweetheart. Walter was saying softly. Your mama's right here. Everything's going to be okay. Clara knelt down and pulled her daughter into her arms. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry you have to be scared. I want to go home, Emma sobbed. I want my bed and Mr. Hoppy, and I want things to be normal. Clara's heart broke. I know you do, soon I promise. She looked up at Walter over Emma's head, and held out the file. She's alive. Walter's face went through a series of transformations, disbelief, hope, joy, and finally a kind of desperate anguish. Where, he whispered. Where is she? I don't know. These photos show she was moving around, staying hidden. But she's out there somewhere. Clara paused. And she's been watching over you. Watching over both of us. Before Walter could respond, Clara heard something that made her blood freeze. Sirens, distant but getting closer. She rushed to the front window and peered through the dusty curtains. 2 police cruisers were turning onto Maple Street, moving slowly, searching. They found us, Clara said. Those men from the warehouse must have called it in. Police. Walter's face went pale. Adrian will have told them I'm dangerous, that I'm having a mental health crisis. They'll take me back to him. Clara's mind raced. They couldn't stay here. The house was too obvious, but they couldn't take her truck either. It was too easily spotted. And then, as if the universe wanted to make things worse, she heard the first rumble of thunder. Clara looked out the window at the sky. Dark clouds were rolling in fast, and the wind had picked up.
The morning news had predicted a major winter storm, but Clara had been too distracted to pay attention. "We need to move," she said. "Now." "Where?" Walter asked. Clara thought fast. They needed somewhere remote, somewhere the police wouldn't think to look, somewhere they could wait out the storm and figure out their next move. And then she remembered. "The old church," she said. "About 15 miles north, off Route 95. It's been abandoned for years, no one goes out there." It was a risk. They'd have to walk, and the storm was coming. But staying here meant getting caught. Clara grabbed what supplies she could find in the house, the camping lantern, a few dusty blankets, a canteen. She stuffed Marjorie's file and the USB drive into her jacket pocket. "Emma, baby, we need to go on another adventure. Can you be brave for Mama?" Emma nodded, wiping her tears, and Clara felt a surge of pride for her daughter's resilience. They slipped out the back door just as the police cruisers pulled up to the house. Clara led them through the overgrown backyard, through a gap in the fence, into the neighbor's property. They moved from yard to yard, staying low, until they reached the edge of the woods. The first snowflakes began to fall. The walk to the church was brutal. The storm came on fast and hard, the wind howling through the trees like something alive and angry. Snow fell so thick Clara could barely see 10 feet ahead. She carried Emma on her back, the little girl's arms wrapped tight around her neck, while Walter struggled along beside them. Clara's legs burned. Her lungs ached, the cold bit through her jacket like teeth. "How much farther?" Walter gasped. He was moving slower now, his age and exhaustion catching up with him. "Not far," Clara lied. They were maybe halfway there, but she couldn't tell him that. "Just keep moving." She thought about turning back, but turning back to what? The police, Adrian's men. At least out here they had a chance. What kind of chance? A voice in her head asked. "You're going to freeze to death in the woods with your daughter." Clara pushed the thought away and kept walking.
After what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, she saw it, the dark shape of the church emerging through the snow. It stood in a small clearing, a simple wooden structure with a crooked steeple and boarded-up windows. "There," Clara said. "We made it." The front door was chained shut, but Clara had expected that. She led them around to the side where she remembered seeing a broken window on one of her electrical jobs out this way years ago. The window was still broken. Clara helped Emma through first, then Walter, and finally pulled herself in. They collapsed onto the dusty floor of the church, gasping for breath. The interior was dark and cold, but at least they were out of the wind. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the boarded windows, casting strange shadows across the empty pews. Clara got the camping lantern working and hung it from a nail in the wall. The warm light pushed back the darkness a little, making the space feel less hostile. "We'll stay here until the storm passes," Clara said, wrapping Emma in one of the blankets. "Try to get some rest," but Walter wasn't listening. He had collapsed against one of the pews, his face gray, his breathing labored. "Mr. Walter," Clara moved to his side, her medical training from her volunteer work kicking in. She felt his forehead, burning hot. His pulse was rapid and weak. "I'm sorry," Walter mumbled, his eyes unfocused. "I'm so sorry, this is all my fault." "Don't talk," Clara said. "Just rest." But Walter grabbed her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Listen to me, please. I need to tell you something." Clara leaned closer. "I knew," Walter said, his words coming in gasps. "I knew what Adrian was doing. Not all of it, but enough, and I didn't stop him. I told myself I was protecting the company, protecting our family legacy, but really I was just a coward." "You're not." "I am." Tears streamed down Walter's face. "Marjorie tried to tell me, she showed me the evidence, begged me to act, but I was afraid. Afraid of scandal, afraid of losing everything. So I let her fight alone, and then she disappeared, and I told myself it was an accident, because believing that was easier than facing the truth." His breathing became more ragged, and Clara felt panic rising in her chest. "The pills," Walter continued, "the ones that made me forget. Part of me wanted to forget, wanted to escape the guilt. But Marjorie," his voice broke, "Marjorie deserved better. Those children deserved better. Mr. Walter, you need to stay calm. Your heart, I'm dying, Walter said matter-of-factly. I can feel it, but before I go, I need you to know, you gave me something I didn't deserve. What? A chance. Walter's eyes met hers, lucid and clear despite the fever. A chance to do the right thing. A chance to be brave when it mattered. You didn't have to help me, you didn't owe me anything, but you did it anyway, because that's who you are. Clara felt tears burning in her eyes. I'm not brave, I'm terrified. I've been terrified since you knocked on my door. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid, Walter said. It means doing what's right even when you're afraid. He squeezed her hand. Promise me something, anything. Find Marjorie, tell her I'm sorry, tell her she was right about everything, and make sure the truth gets out. Don't let Adrian win. I promise, Clara whispered. Walter smiled, a genuine smile, peaceful and relieved. Thank you, for everything, for giving an old fool his courage back. His eyes drifted closed, and his breathing slowly evened out. Clara sat with him for a long time, holding his hand, listening to the storm rage outside. Emma curled up beside them, exhausted, and Clara held her other hand. In the flickering lantern light, in an abandoned church in the middle of a snowstorm, Clara Evans made herself a promise. She would see this through, no matter what it cost, for Marjorie, for Walter, for all the children whose lives had been destroyed by Adrian's greed, and for Emma, so her daughter could grow up in a world where standing up to evil still meant something. Clara woke to silence. The storm had passed, and pale morning light filtered through the cracks in the boarded windows. Emma was still asleep, curled up in the blanket, but Walter, Clara's heart clenched. Walter lay exactly as he had the night before, his hand still in hers, but his chest was still. She pressed her fingers to his neck, already knowing what she'd find. No pulse. Walter Hensley had died sometime in the night, peacefully, his face finally free of the fear and confusion that had haunted him. Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. She'd known this man for less than 48 hours, but in that time he'd become important to her. He'd trusted her with his life, his secrets, his last chance at redemption, and now he was gone. Mommy? Emma stirred, rubbing her eyes. Is Mr. Walter sleeping? Clara swallowed hard. Baby, Mr. Walter he's at peace now. He's not hurting anymore. Emma looked at Walter's still form, then at her mother. She was only 5, but Clara saw understanding dawn in her eyes. Did he go to heaven? Emma asked quietly. Yeah, sweetheart, I think he did. Emma crawled over, and placed her small hand on Walter's. Bye, Mr. Walter, thank you for being nice. Clara pulled her daughter close, holding her while they both cried. After a while, Clara gently arranged Walter's body, crossing his hands over his chest. She covered him with one of the blankets. I'm sorry I can't do more right now, she whispered to him. But I promise I'll keep my word. She pulled out her phone. No signal. They were too far from town. Clara looked at Emma. We need to walk back toward the road, okay? We need to find help. Are the bad men still looking for us? Probably, Clara said honestly, but I have an idea. She'd thought about it all night while she'd kept vigil over Walter. Adrian Hensley had power, money and connections, but he also had an Achilles heel, his public image. Everything he'd done had been hidden behind a facade of respectability. What if that facade crumbled? Clara had the evidence. She had Marjorie's files, the USB drive, the photographs. What she needed now was a way to get that evidence to someone who could use it, someone Adrian couldn't control or threaten. And then she remembered. 6 months ago Clara had done an emergency electrical repair for a woman named Rachel Diaz, a freelance investigative journalist who'd moved to Bangor to write a book about corruption in small city politics. Clara had fixed her apartment's wiring at 11 p.m. on a Friday night when everyone else had refused to come out. Rachel had been so grateful she'd given Clara her card and said, "If you ever have a story worth telling, call me." At the time Clara had laughed it off. What stories did an electrician have? Now she knew. They walked for nearly an hour before Clara's phone picked up a signal. She dialed the number on the card she'd kept in her wallet, praying Rachel would answer. Hello, Rachel Diaz, this is Clara Evans. I did electrical work for you last year. I need your help. There was a pause. Clara, are you okay? You sound I'm not okay. I have evidence of massive financial fraud, embezzlement, and possibly murder. And the people involved are trying to kill me.
Another pause, longer this time. Then where are you? Rachel Diaz met them at a diner on the outskirts of town, neutral territory, public enough to be safe but quiet enough to talk. Clara had spent the last of her cash on hot chocolate for Emma, and coffee for herself. Emma sat in the booth coloring on napkins, while Clara spread out the documents on the table. Rachel, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, studied everything with the focused intensity of a predator sizing up prey. Jesus Christ, she muttered, flipping through the financial statements, this is huge. Hensley Group is one of the biggest employers in the state. I know, Clara said, that's why I need your help. I can't go to the police, half of them are probably on his payroll. I need someone who can get this out publicly, all at once, before he can suppress it. Rachel looked up at her. You understand what you're asking. If I run this story, Hensley will come after both of us with everything he has. Legal teams, PR firms, maybe worse. A man died to protect this information, Clara said quietly. And another person has been in hiding for 5 years. I promised I'd see it through. Rachel studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but we do this right. I need to verify everything, cross-check sources, make sure it's airtight. That'll take time. How much time? 48 hours, maybe less if I can confirm some of this with independent sources. Clara felt a weight lift slightly from her shoulders. Thank you, don't thank me yet. Rachel pulled out her laptop. We have work to do. While Emma napped in the booth, Clara and Rachel went through everything. Clara told her the whole story. Walter's appearance at her door, the warehouse, the house on Maple Street, the evidence Marjorie had compiled. Rachel recorded it all, her fingers flying over the keyboard. This Marjorie Walsh, Rachel said. You said she's still alive. Do you have any way to contact her? Clara shook her head. The photos showed she was in hiding, but maybe once the story breaks, she'll feel safe enough to come forward. Maybe. Rachel saved her files and closed the laptop. In the meantime, you need to stay somewhere safe, somewhere Hensley can't find you. I don't have anywhere, Clara admitted. I can't go home. I can't afford a hotel. Rachel thought for a moment, then pulled out another card. Call this number, tell them I sent you. They run a shelter for women in crisis situations, domestic violence, stalking, that kind of thing. They'll take you in, no questions asked. Clara took the card, feeling tears prick her eyes again. I don't know how to thank you. Thank me by staying alive long enough for me to publish this story, Rachel said with a slight smile. Then her expression turned serious. Clara, I want you to understand something. What you're doing, standing up to someone this powerful, most people wouldn't have the guts. You're braver than you know. Clara thought of Walter's words in the church. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. I'm terrified, she said honestly. Good, Rachel said. That means you're smart, but you're doing it anyway. That's what matters. The shelter Rachel sent them to was a nondescript house on a quiet street, run by a woman named Patricia, who asked no questions and simply showed Clara and Emma to a small room with 2 beds. You're safe here, Patricia said. No one gets in without going through me first. Rest, eat, we'll keep watch. For the first time in 2 days, Clara felt like she could breathe. She tucked Emma into bed, kissing her forehead. I love you so much, baby. I love you too, Mommy. Emma yawned. Are we going to be okay? Yeah, Clara said, and this time she believed it. We're going to be okay. As Emma drifted off to sleep, Clara pulled out her phone. Rachel had given her a secure email address to send the files. Clara uploaded everything, the documents, the photographs, the recording she'd made of Walter's confession. Before she hit send, she wrote a note. Dear Marjorie, you don't know me, but I helped Walter in his final days. He wanted me to tell you he was sorry. He said you were right about everything. I'm sending you this so you know the truth is finally coming out. Walter found his courage in the end. He died trying to make things right. If you're out there, if you're reading this, you're not alone anymore. We're going to finish what you started. Clara Evans. She hit send, and watched the files upload. There was no going back now. Clara lay down on the other bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. But before she fell asleep, she thought of Walter's peaceful face in the church, of his final words, of the promise she'd made. Don't let Adrian win, she wouldn't. No matter what came next, she wouldn't. 3 months later, Clara stood in front of the house on Maple Street, watching as the construction crew finished repainting the trim. The old Victorian had been transformed, new roof, repaired porch, fresh white paint with the doors still that distinctive red. Emma ran circles around the old oak tree in the front yard, laughing, her new winter boots crunching on the last patches of snow. It was early March, and winter was finally loosening its grip on Maine. "It looks good," a voice said behind her. Clara turned, and found herself face to face with Marjorie Walsh. She'd appeared 2 weeks after Rachel's story broke, the exposé that had dominated headlines across New England. Hensley Group, a legacy of fraud. Rachel had been thorough, devastating, undeniable. Adrian Hensley had been arrested within 48 hours. Federal investigators had swooped in, seizing records, freezing accounts. The empire he'd built on lies had collapsed in a matter of days, and Marjorie had finally come out of hiding. She was older than in the photographs Clara had seen, her dark hair now streaked with gray, her face lined with years of stress and fear, but her eyes were warm, intelligent, alive. "Thank you," Marjorie said, extending her hand. "For keeping your promise to Walter, for being brave enough to see it through." Clara shook her hand. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Marjorie said firmly. "Most people would have turned Walter away. Most people would have called the police and washed their hands of the whole thing. You didn't. You risked everything. Your safety, your daughter's safety for a stranger." Clara felt her throat tighten. "He wasn't a stranger by the end." "No," Marjorie agreed softly. "He wasn't." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Emma play. "The foundation is being rebuilt," Marjorie said. "The courts unfroze the assets, and we're getting everything back on track. We're calling it the Hensley Walsh Foundation now. In memory of Walter." Clara smiled. "He would have liked that. And we want you to help run it," Marjorie continued. "The technical side, facilities management, operations. Walters will left specific instructions. He wanted to make sure you and Emma were taken care of." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "He didn't have to." "Yes, he did." Marjorie's voice was gentle but firm. "You gave him back his dignity, his courage, his chance to do the right thing. That's worth more than money can buy." Clara thought about the past 3 months, the media frenzy, the trial, the way Emma had handled it all with a resilience that amazed her, the scholarship fund that had been set up in Walter's name, enough to cover Emma's education through college, the job offer from the foundation, stable work, good pay, benefits, the way their lives had transformed from desperate survival to genuine hope. "I'll think about it," Clara said, though she already knew her answer. Marjorie smiled, knowingly. "Take your time, the foundation isn't going anywhere." Emma ran over, breathless and grinning. "Mommy, look." She held up a small green shoot poking through the soil beneath the oak tree. "The flowers are coming back." Clara knelt down beside her daughter, examining the tiny shoot. "So they are, baby. Does that mean spring is here?" "Yeah," Clara said, looking up at the house, at the red door, at the fresh paint, at the windows that now let in light instead of keeping it out. "I think it does." As Marjorie excused herself to take a phone call, Emma looked up at her mother with those bright, curious eyes. "Mommy, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetie. Why did we help Mr. Walter? We didn't even know him." Clara thought about how to answer, how to explain to a 5-year-old the complex web of compassion, responsibility, and moral courage that had driven her decisions. But then she realized the answer was actually simple. She sat down on the porch steps and pulled Emma close. "Do you remember how you felt when we found Mr. Walter in the snow, that first night?" Emma nodded. "I was scared, but also sad for him, because he looked so lost." "That's exactly why we helped him," Clara said. "Because sometimes people get lost, not because they forgot the way home, but because they need someone to hold a light so they can find their way back." Emma thought about this for a moment. "Like when you use your flashlight to help me see in the dark. Just like that." Clara kissed the top of her daughter's head. "And someday, when you're older, maybe you'll hold the light for someone else. That's how we make the world a little bit brighter." "I want to do that," Emma said solemnly. "I want to help people find their way." Clara felt her heart swell with pride and love. Whatever else came from this experience, the trauma, the fear, the danger, Emma had learned something invaluable. She'd learned that kindness mattered, that courage existed even in ordinary people, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was open your door to someone in need. Marjorie returned, slipping her phone back into her pocket. That was Rachel Diaz. She's won an award for her investigative reporting. She wants to interview us both for her book. A book? Clara raised her eyebrows. About ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Marjorie smiled. She says your story needs to be told. Clara thought about Walter, about those final hours in the church, about his last words to her. You gave me something I didn't deserve, a chance. Maybe everyone deserved a chance to be brave, a chance to do the right thing, a chance to find their way home. Okay, Clara said, tell her I'll do it. 6 months later, the grand reopening of the Hensley Walsh Foundation was held on a crisp autumn day. The new building, modern and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows and an open design, stood where the old one had burned. Clara stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, in her new role as Director of Operations, watching as children from 3 different orphanages explored their new community center. Emma was among them, showing a little boy how to use the art supplies in the craft room. Rachel's book had been published to critical acclaim. Adrian Hensley was serving a 20-year sentence in federal prison. The investigation had expanded, ensnaring a dozen other corrupt officials and businessmen, and Marjorie had become something of a folk hero, the woman who'd sacrificed everything to expose the truth, and had lived to see justice served. But for Clara, the real victory was simpler. It was Emma's laughter as she played with other children. It was the stability of a steady paycheck and benefits. It was the knowledge that Walter Hensley had found peace in his final hours. It was the small apartment they'd moved into. Nothing fancy but clean and safe and theirs. It was the way strangers sometimes stopped her on the street to thank her for what she'd done. But most of all, it was the message that had appeared in her email one quiet evening, from an encrypted account she didn't recognize. Dear Clara, you kept your promise. Walter would be proud. The light you held in the darkness saved more than one lost soul. It gave an old woman her life back. It gave dozens of children a future. It proved that one person, acting with courage and compassion, can change the world. Thank you for being the kind of person who opens the door when someone knocks, even at 2 a.m., even in a snowstorm, even when it would be easier not to. The world needs more people like you. With eternal gratitude, M.W. Clara had printed that message and kept it in her wallet, next to the photograph of Michael and the business card Rachel had given her all those months ago. On days when the work felt overwhelming, when the memories of that terrifying chase through the snow came back, when she doubted whether she'd done the right thing, she pulled out that message and read it again, and remembered that sometimes, the smallest act of kindness could ripple outward in ways you never imagined. Sometimes, opening your door meant opening someone's future. Sometimes, one person's courage was all it took to let the light back in. Now, standing in the foundation building, Clara looked out the window at Maple Street in the distance. She could just make out the red door of the house, the oak tree standing sentinel in the yard. Emma appeared at her side, tugging on her sleeve. Mommy, look what I made. It was a drawing, crude but heartfelt. It showed 3 figures, a woman, a child, and an old man with a white beard. They were standing in front of a house, and above them, Emma had drawn a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in her careful kindergarten handwriting, Emma had written, Familia. It's beautiful, baby, Clara said, her eyes misting. We'll hang it in your room. Emma beamed. Then with the casual wisdom of children, she said, I'm glad we helped Mr. Walter. I think that's what families do. They help people. Clara pulled her daughter close, looking out at the city they called home, a city that had tested them, broken them, and ultimately allowed them to heal. Yeah, baby, she whispered. That's exactly what families do. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the street, and for a moment, Clara could have sworn she saw a figure standing by the oak tree on Maple Street, an old man with kind eyes, smiling, before he faded into the light. Thank you, she thought, for trusting me. for giving me a purpose, for reminding me that we're stronger than we know. The light that had guided Walter Hensley home had become a beacon for Clara too, and now, it was her turn to hold that light for others, one person at a time, one open door at a time, one act of courage at a time, until the darkness retreated, and spring returned to Maple Street.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.